that, then I would like to call to order the special meeting of the Board of Selectmen for Monday, March 3rd. Please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So I think tonight, and I did actually want to share just some guidelines. If you could, Jeannie, put up on the my slides up on the board, just highlight again what the purpose of today's discussion is, because I know there's been a lot of discussion about what our purpose is, and this is a process that we've laid out when we adopted our timeline in January for a referendum. Hold on, this is our attorney who's supposed to be joining the call, so let me just double check to see. Yes. Oh, okay, I'll have her. Okay, I'll have her email it to you right now because we just started the meeting. Okay, that's okay. I've got a few minutes to talk at the beginning. Okay, thanks.
I'll have pepperoni on mine.
Jeannie, can you email Matt the link? For some reason, he said it wasn't in the invite that he got. So just send him the meeting link. Can you hear me? Jeannie?
Is she here?
I can hear you. I will send it to him.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so she'll pull the slides back up. I guess we lost the share from you. Thank you. She's multitasking.
Yeah.
So I just want to highlight today the purpose of today's discussion. We adopted a timeline, a draft timeline for a referendum on May 6th for the community center project, and that there was a timeline presented about all the different steps that need to be taken in order to get us to that referendum. The referendum will be asking voter approval to spend more money on the project, basically what we call supplemental appropriation above the 15.9 that was approved in February 2022, that was approved for bonding. The project budget is currently short approximately $8 million. If you look at the recommendation of the Academy Building Committee, when they put forward a design, any additional funds above the 15.9 that were approved at referendum, we are proposing to be financed through grants and donations only. And so that's reflected in the documents, the resolution that the board received today. And in order to do that, we have to go to referendum to approve those changes. And then just highlighting, the town has been awarded $7.625 million in major grants, the USDA grant from the federal government, and then a state grant for $4 million. So tonight we'll kind of talk about where we are in the project, talk about we as a board, what we want to do to get approval, from the public, what dollar amount we want to get approval. We'll also, Ben is our construction manager is going to talk about some of the work he conducted. And then if everybody's comfortable with the resolution in their packet, we would just basically voting to approve a resolution and just recommending a supplemental appropriation. We're not approving the appropriation. The only people that can approve that are the voters of Madison, but we're just making a recommendation. Then it goes to the Board of Finance, and then it goes to a town meeting, which immediately adjourns to a referendum. So that's kind of the process we went through also when we did the February 2022 referendum. So if we go to the next page, I'll just highlight, and we'll go back to this at the end of the meeting, but the next page just highlights, Jeannie, if you go to the next page, the referendum. So now is the updated timeline. Now we're today. We're having a special meeting, and you'll see this is similar to what we had previously. Today's the special meeting to recommend the supplemental appropriation, and that we're going to be using for grant monies. And then the Board of Finance will then schedule something, and I've spoken to the chair, and he's going to work out a time in the next 2 weeks that the Board of Finance would then have the same meeting to recommend this special appropriation. And then I've put some tentative dates for the public information sessions. I just kind of have placeholders those. I want to check back with people and everything and confirm that, but we've got some placeholders to squeeze in 3 of these. So there's lots of opportunity for the public to learn, hear, and see what's going on with this.
Wait, say that again, 3 of them?
3, that's one more than we did in 2022. So, but
People hear that.
yeah, and they're all recorded. So you can always watch these online. And then April 9th is the kind of big meeting where we call the referendum. The Board of Selectmen has the authority to do that. We will call the question. And so tonight doesn't actually have a question in it. It just has the resolution recommending the appropriation. These are the same steps we did in 2022. And then we would set the date of the special town meeting, set the date of the referendum. And then the explanatory text is the document that we gave to the public explaining what the referendum is all about. And so we'll update that explanatory text that we gave to the public in 2022. So once we have that meeting and we call the question, we go into kind of what's called silent period. And it doesn't mean we can't answer questions, but we can't advocate necessarily, use town resources. So we just provide facts and figures and response and give information to the public that way. And then we'll go through the process of doing a postcard again if the board decides to do that, as we did in the last referendum. So everybody gets a postcard saying, hey, there's a referendum coming, and information about absentee ballots. We'll publish a notice, just like we normally do. And then we have this special town meeting. It's kind of a weird thing that's, for some reason, we do this process in our charter, that it's not a voting town meeting. It immediately adjourns to a referendum. So it's not a voting thing. It's just kind of a procedural thing. And then the referendum is held May 6th. So tonight, we're looking at this resolution to recommend the supplemental appropriation. And so you have a draft of that in your packet. And so we'll get to that in a few minutes, but I thought it'd be helpful just to talk about, because in that there's a recommendation of how big their appropriation should be, right? And so I think it's helpful to understand that you have a memo from our construction manager in your packet that talks through, you know, are we going to have enough money to do this, right? If we do get all our grants, and we look at what was approved, or what the bids came back in the package from the bids that we received in December, and what the building committee was recommending, do we have enough funding to cover this, and can we deliver? And so I thought we could, so what I had done is actually reached out to our construction manager and said, I want to make sure that we can get this project done. If we get all the grants through. And remember, the grant for the federal grant has limitations on it. It's not for construction costs, right? It's only for what we call soft costs. So I want to make sure, do we have enough soft costs? Do we have enough for the construction budget? Are there things we can do if other unforeseen things pop up? Are there areas where we can value engineer to ensure that if we get another approval for more money, that we can get this done, right? Because we don't want to be in a situation where we're short again, right? So we want to ask one more time, and that's it. And so then I also said, well, what if the federal grant fell through? And I talked to him, this is before we got the packet of information from the USDA. And I said, what if we just wanted to do it with the $4 million grant from the state? So we'd have a $20 million budget versus a $24 million budget. And so he spent some time looking at that scenario and whether or not it was workable. And then I said, well, what if we didn't go out to referendum and we just went forward with the 15.9? Is that even feasible? We talked a lot about that a year ago. We felt like you sacrificed way too much. And I think it's just gotten worse now because the pricing came back so much higher. So the 15.9 doesn't even get us what we thought we might get a year ago when we were having this conversation. It's far worse. So I thought, Ben, it details this in the memo, but if you maybe just a high level walk through your conclusions, that would be great. And then the board can ask questions on that.
So kind of just to preface the work that was done here a little bit more is I wasn't validating the budget as it was presented from the building committee. That takes time, resources. You know, there's a team that's been involved in this project for years. I'm coming into this in a couple weeks. I'm not validating the 23.9. The exercise I did undertake was if their number right now is 23.9, our max financing is 23.5. We're going to round up to 4 and up to 24. Hope for some donations, give ourselves a little wiggle room there. But what we want to know is if that 23.9 is the real number, and there's no reason to think it's not, how do we give ourselves a little bit more room? So task one was, let's see if we could peel a couple pieces of this project back and try to get to 22.5. That'll give us some wiggle room when we get into construction. It'll take care of, there's not an issue, but a caveat in one of the federal grants where there's what's called a performance period. where some of these soft costs are only eligible for reimbursement if they took place between a certain time window. So there's possibly $400,000 that wouldn't be able to be reimbursed under that. We're going to work through that. Hopefully we can get an extension from the feds to widen that window a little bit, but whatever. So step one was, let's get into this and see where we could do some good old fashioned value engineering, even though I hate that term, we've been using it a lot lately. And in this situation, it's actually accurate. So sat down with Brian Park from QAM. This is kind of my introduction to the project as well. And we spent about 3 hours working through, he had done some homework, I had some initial ideas. We came together, compared notes, and started hashing out situations, basically. What could we do to try to get down from 23.9 to 22.5 and without impacting the project as a whole? Like, the building is still going to function the way the design intended it to function. So again, usually you start with things that are skin deep, like finishes, lighting, ceilings, things like that, but no removal of any core spaces or services. So at the end of that exercise, we got 18 things that we think we could remove from the project without too much harm. Now, they have not been vetted by the building committee. They are just on paper at this point, not approved by anybody. That got us about $696,000. So needless to say, we did not get down to the 22.5 with those kind of skin deep changes. The good news is that got us within the funding amount. So that, if you take that 696 off of the building committee's budget, we're at 23,252,100. So we are within the 23,525 that we have financing arranged for, and certainly under the 24 million. So that was the good news that came out of that situation, was at least it puts us in the realm of, can you do this project for the amount of money we have if we do these couple of things? Yes, I think we can. That was scenario one. Do you want to do questions per scenario or run through all
And
of
if
them
there's
first?
anything specific now, or? No? Okay.
The rest of them are pretty quick. That was, most of the work happened in that scenario. Scenario two, so what we did was pretty much everything that was part of scenario one would carry over into 2 or 3, because why not? Scenario two was, let's try to get this project budget to 20 million by taking one or more pieces out of the project. If you're giving up almost $4 million, something is going to change in the building. It's not just going to be, going to a less fancy ceiling or something like that. We got about 295,000 additional items that we could do kind of in a phase two, which got us close to $1 million. But the bottom line is we came nowhere near being able to take a piece of this project out. Even at the, if you had to pick favorites of the different people in the building and say, okay, you don't get your space, we still really couldn't come up with that number. So for example, the low-hanging fruit was the basement. What if we just don't do the basement and reorganize the rest of the space in the building? Well, the issue is we need the restrooms that are in the basement to meet code, because the gym occupancy level calls for it. If you're gonna have restrooms in the basement, now you need corridors in the basement, you need fire protection in the basement. So that just kind of was like, okay, then what are we doing? All we're really doing at that point is we're taking the finishes and flooring and paint out of the basement, which is nowhere near $3 million worth of work. So that was scenario two, which was essentially a no-go. I'll just go right into scenario three because they're almost the same. Scenario three is, what do we do if there are no other grants or the referendum fails and we are left with this 15.9? That conversation centered around, could we just do the infrastructure in the building? And could we do anything other than just the infrastructure in the building, I should say? Answer to that was no. The 15.9 would essentially suck up everything required to make that building a functioning building mechanically. It would be able to accept occupancy in the future, but it would have nothing in it that would make it habitable. Basically, that last $8 million is the difference between a shell of a building and a building that's ready to occupy and serve its users. So that one kind of fell in its face as well. So in short, we have, can you do the project with possibly a couple of value engineering items in there? Sure. You don't even have to make the decision on what those are now. We're pretty close. 2 and 3, I think we're out at this point. So that's kind of just to set the framework for what a potential referendum would look like. And if some of these grant funds didn't come through, we have no reason to believe that they're not. but wanted to map them out anyway.
Awesome.
Great.
Thanks, Ben.
So I don't know if there's any questions about the scenarios. I think we kind of knew the 15.9 was, especially now. I mean, we were hoping it was an option, but I think we just have to recognize that we cannot deliver a community center for 15.9. So I think that answers a lot of people's questions, right? And this just kind of reconfirms, I know the building committee has been talking about this for a year, right? That they've beaten their heads against the wall many times to look at this, but I think it was just important to kind of put that final, conclusion on the table. And then the other grant piece, maybe just to give a little update to the public, we did receive an obligation letter from the USDA last week, which was very promising, that basically said the funds have now been transferred and are being held in an account in the town of Madison's name for the project. So this, I would argue, means we're kind of in the same space as all the other federal grants we've received, which we have agreements for. We still are in a period of uncertainty with how the federal grant, what's happening with federal grants. There's been this temporary pause that was put on by the current administration. And so I'm hopeful that, that pause will be lifted and we can continue. There's court cases that are ordering them to, if we were going to submit invoices, they have to pay us. So, but, obviously we'll keep watching this. And by the time we go to referendum, I think there'll be some clarity on this. There's no guarantees, and that's something the board will have to keep revisiting as we move down here about any of our federal grants. But the good news is that was a big step forward for us, because we were unsure if that step was going to be taken, given a lot of the change in philosophy and administration of the various federal agencies. So we feel good about it now that, and let's be honest, when we talked about this in the fall, we knew we were going to be short when we went out to bid. But we hoped that our state grant could cover it, right? Which is $4 million. We didn't think we were going to be $7 or $8 million out of budget. We thought we might be 2 or 3, right? And so the federal grant was seen as like a big bonus on top of this. And and unfortunately now we need that grant in order to really deliver to the public, the building that everybody wants to see built, and with all the amenities that it wants. So I think the other item in his memo, we could talk a little bit about, because I know this came up. I attended the building committee meeting last week, and there was a lot of conversation about the bidding, the bids, because do we want to actually request that the bids be extended that were submitted in December? And I know there might have been a difference in opinion by some of the building committee members. They have not weighed in formally on this. I did ask for the opinion of town staff, and that's detailed in your memo that lays out the reasons. The recommendation is that we just continue and rebid the project. And I will mention, another thing that was not in your memo was that there were also some things that were not compliance issues with their grants that were not in that original bid package, especially because the federal grant was tenuous. So grants have all these, things you've got to do, and one of them is you have to get it reviewed and approved and all this other stuff by the agencies that are awarding the grant. So I think that that's just another reason why we're better off kind of resetting this if it gets approved and going out to bid again, knowing that there are some risk factors with that as well because of the economic uncertainty that we're in now. So with that, I guess I'll open up for discussion on those. So the conclusion, I guess, with this is we came up with the appropriation amount that's in the resolution. I just said, let's just round this out. It just, because we're going to still pursue some other grants that we're thinking about, including one, Bruce, that, we talked about with the tax credits. Once again, so I said, let's just, make it a flat number versus a little shy of that. And it accounts for the design that the building committee had endorsed. And then we'll pursue some of these other grants. But the bottom line is if we don't get them or secure them, we can't spend the money. So it just gives us that wiggle room if we're able to get a donation or another grant in. It gives us a little extra buffer there. So
we're saying 24 million, however,
we know that we currently have, what is it, 23,254,100, right? So if we don't get the additional to make it to 24, then that 23.25
Is the cap.
is the cap.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
really 15.9 plus grants, which right now is 15.9 plus 7.365.
So we're not asking for any more money
No.
from the public.
No,
No,
no.
but to be sort of precise about this,
Yeah,
if Representative Ritter were to shake the couches of Hartford and come up with another $5 million grant, the project would still top out at 24,
Right,
and the excess would begin to
Off
reduce
the
the
bonds.
bonding.
Yes,
yes.
Right, so
yeah.
we're not, so we could receive millions of dollars in extra grants, I'm not saying we will. In that event, the project still won't exceed $24 million.
Right,
Exactly.
because we're approving appropriation for that amount of
Right.
24 million. It's not open-ended.
Right.
And I will say, I thought, well, maybe we should, just put a much higher number, because if we luck out and get another big grant, right, in the next, 3 to 6 months. But I think the reality is the public wants to know what we're spending on this project. It's not gonna be just this open-ended thing. So, so when we say spend, it's not town funds. 15.9 will be town funds. That will be the bonding that we had approved in 2022. It'll be other sources of financing outside of the town. And that's what's in the resolution that's before you. So let me just, so for Ben, are there any more questions for Ben on the analysis that he did? And
Well, I mean, not necessarily questions. I think it just, he presents an interesting discussion, which is we're kind of all in or we're all out. We seem to have a path, a reasonable path to completing the project at a number 24 million or less that meets the expectations of the original referendum, the intentions of the original referendum. But should we not get that approval from the taxpayers, we are pretty much back to quite literally square one or square zero.
yeah, it'd be
Or actually-
15.9 to update a building just to mothball it again.
Right, which I don't think
And
That
anybody
doesn't
has an
seem-
appetite to do.
Right. I think the community center just cannot happen, unfortunately. If this referendum fails,
I agree.
Yep.
then I think the community center cannot, or frankly, any repurposing of that building.
I agree.
Because the problem is it's gonna cost, you're not, I know there's a lot of
And the clock
ideas
is
about how to use the building, but it needs infrastructure, it needs roofs, it needs windows, it needs all these things. So no matter what people would envision for that, the costs to renovate and update are significant for that building.
As the clock keeps ticking, the
So
reality is it gets probably
Well,
worse and
yeah.
worse and worse too.
it's continued to get
Yeah.
more expensive.
So I don't know where in the discussion you want to have a little bit more comment, more discussion amongst us about that, if we want to put the motion out and then discuss it.
In terms of this motion or
Yeah.
this, yeah, so we can move on to item number 4, and I just wanna, the last part of this motion, I'm gonna amend it and drop that, because that was kind of not, this recommendation isn't pending, it's more the next step in the process, right? So this pending meeting and Board of Finance permission have been on there, so item number 4 is discuss and take possible action to approve a resolution recommending a supplemental appropriation to renovate the Academy School into a community center and municipal building.
So move.
Second,
Okay, so this is, we worked with, Stacy and I worked with Matt on drafting, and Matt Ritter's joining us, who, Attorney Ritter is joining us, from Shipman and Goodman, who's our bond counsel. He, just so everybody understands, he was involved during the first referendum, so he's very familiar with the projects. And we had a lot of discussion about this, how to word it to make sure it's clear. This is not the question that's going on the ballot. This is the resolution behind the question. So everybody have an opportunity to read this to the public when they're voting on this, but it's not going to be on the ballot itself.
Right, but it certainly sets the fences for the question.
It does, yes,
And
yes.
just maybe just put a fine point on when we set the question, just so that the public understands. So that's in April timeframe?
So that would be April 9th, and correct me, Matt, if April 9th is the correct date, right? That's when we actually call the question.
Correct. So on that date, you'll schedule both the special town meeting and the referendum. Yep.
And so the resolution I think talks about the $8.1 million, which is basically the increase in the appropriation, right? That then raises the total budget for the project with 24 million, but it also confirms in here that no bonds or notes of the town will not exceed 15.9 million to finance it. And that the sources of the funding are going to be federal grants, state grants, or private donations to finance the supplemental appropriation of 8.1 million. And so I think it made it, and, you know, I think it makes it crystal clear. I don't know if you had any, is there any wording issues? Do you think,
No, I think it's extraordinarily tight. It affirms that we do not intend to use Madison property taxpayer dollars to pay for this.
Right.
I get that it's all our taxpayer dollars, regardless of its source, but
We're not using
Local-
significantly
local
diluted,
taxes,
more
right?
diluted than property tax dollars would be. So on that, I think,
And I think that's gonna be the art of, writing the question on the referendum is making
Right.
sure that the public and frankly, the education up to the referendum understands that that's what we're doing, is using the grant money.
Right.
right, and so I mean,
We
I,
have some ideas about that.
Yeah, I bet you do.
Yeah.
um,
And I think we'll do a draft of that question before the April 9th meeting, so we're all comfortable with the language and make sure it's very tight, because it's a nuanced thing, right?
Yeah.
It's trying to, make sure that people don't misinterpret what the question is asking.
and we've touched on it already tonight, but I think, and I mean, I'm in full support of this resolution. But I think part of the ongoing conversation in the community has got to be what we just said, which is approval of the appropriation means full steam ahead. We're gonna go and we're gonna get this done. If the question fails, then for all intents and purposes, we're not gonna pursue a community center in that building. And it also doesn't mean that we're gonna look to bond the 15.9 million to secure the building, that we're gonna have to come up with a different path.
Yes, yeah, and we can't, I don't think, just, we went out with prospectuses, we had investors, there was a purpose for the project, and we bonded $6 million so far. We talked about this at our last meeting, right? We already bonded $6 million with the anticipation we were gonna start construction this year, given the bid cycle that we were on. So I think that we should talk about that at another meeting, what those options would be. We talked about, I know that we can take that money to use to pay off debt. That was something Attorney Ritter had advised us that we could do. But there could be other conversations about, because even to take the building down, and I'm of the view that we would never do that without public approval. So that would, going through a referendum process, that's gonna cost like $3 million probably. I don't have a hard number on it, but we need to know this is gonna be an expensive process no matter what we do.
And so just as it's important to educate voters on what they would be voting for, we want to educate them on the consequences of a vote against, so that if they do that, they're doing it deliberately. Part of that is the cost of unwinding this. What exactly is the cost of unwinding this?
Cost and not saving the building too. I mean, you have just the physical building that we may not be able to save.
Well, there's that, but there are financial implications for halting the project and then making good on our obligations.
With existing bonds.
Exactly, and so I think all of that needs to be on the table. I think we're pretty
Yeah.
unanimously conveying our consensus that
Yeah.
a defeated referendum question is kind of the end of the community center
Yeah, at the
discussion.
end of the project.
And so we're gonna need to address that as well in the public information.
Yeah,
Back to
and I-
selling or whatever.
And that's where I think, and that's where I think that we need to have a discussion about that, so that the messaging and the public information is clear about what those steps are if the referendum fails. So that is something we gotta vet a little bit more and have some thoughtful, I don't know if we're gonna have the answer, but we can certainly lay out things we know can't happen, right, which we just discussed. So, because I do think there's a lot of discussion in the public, how there's all these other things you could do with the building. I said, well, first of all, you now have to reset and get financing again, especially if you're looking at any kind of revenue generating type things besides community use, because we issue taxes and bonds,
Well, I
right?
think
So,
If this gets voted down though, then that's pretty much saying that the town can't move forward with doing anything with this building. I mean, we already know it's gonna be 15.9 just to update mechanicals, and then we can't do anything with it. So if it's a no vote,
Not saying
Then
the building.
we're not saving the building.
Yeah.
It's either, gonna get voted to get torn down, or it's gonna get sold and repurposed by a commercial somebody or other, but it can't be a town
But
project.
so that's an interesting question though. So I've been asked this a fair amount, but, you guys probably have as well, that if it does fail, are we then providing options? So is the public going to be educated in advance about options? Or are we not really going down that path of options until it's a yes or no?
I don't think we can go down the
I
path
kinda
of
feel the same
options
way.
until it's a yes
You know
or
the
no.
answer.
People need to make a decision based on this, and then
Yeah.
we
I feel
move
the
to
same
the
way.
next phase.
I agree.
because it also will cost money to explore those options, right? We'd have to spend money on a hazardous material assessment to take the building down. We would have to, I know housing was looked at a number of years ago, and a lot of people talk about that now, should it be housing? But the reality is, the
Nobody-
renovation costs are extraordinary,
But nobody
so-
wanted just the building.
Yeah,
That was the issue,
and then
right?
they
They
don't
wanted
want
the
the
acreage.
building. They
Yeah.
wanted all the space that the town didn't want to sell. So the economics really didn't work for housing, for the building on its own, because the renovations would have been so expensive.
We got a lot of
It would have been
pushback on the
unlikely to be
acreage.
affordable. And yeah, so could you do a building only? So those are all things. I know some people don't understand that so many things were vetted over the years with this building. Now circumstances have changed, but, I don't think we're gonna have answers to that by May 6th. But what we will, the important answer, I think, and this is unfortunate, I would be sad to say this, is that we cannot deliver the community center that people envisioned in the 2022 referendum, right? A community center can. So that is basically,
Yeah.
the one thing we can say with confirmation now, just with all the information we have.
It's definitive.
It is, so, which is, disappoining,
I have
but
a technical question for Ben. I hope you brought your crystal ball with you tonight.
It's always on me. It always
It's
lies.
his superpower.
Yeah, it always lies though.
Um, Are you able to opine at all as to the impact that tariffs might have on the building materials that we're gonna need for this building?
No, because that would be as speculative as could be. That's the real answer. I mean, who knows what's gonna happen with that? I mean, I think a lot of the materials in the building now aren't gonna be impacted as much by tariffs, like things like steel, which there's almost none. There's some of the new entrants, but it's not like you were erecting a steel building, so, I'd say it's on the lower end of impact if all the tariffs went through as they're currently either scheduled to do or people are talking about them happening. But again, that's my only thought on tariffs is that I think that, I mean, obviously that's going to impact every project we're doing. And it's going to be something that contractors probably aren't even going to factor into their bids right now, because if some do and some don't, you're going to know who wins the bids and who don't, right? The other thing is if say, for example, we went under contract tomorrow and some sort of wide-reaching tariff hit next week, my opinion, and probably the courts are going to start fighting this stuff out, is that it would almost be like a force majeure. It's almost something that was beyond out of everybody's control. Therefore, they're going to come back to their customer for an increase because of it. So if it was going to happen, really earlier the better, or after we finish the project. But in the middle was where it would be tough from a risk management standpoint.
And I think also that, this is a short-term kind of thing that's going on right now. We're hoping that this is kind of part of a strategy to, that somehow by the time we're going out in May, this might be resolved, the tariff situation, one or the other.
Yeah.
Because it would be extraordinarily damaging to the US economy for this to go on right now. It would just be horrific for it, so.
Can I ask one more question? For Ben, again, and you don't need to stand up, you don't need to hit the podium. There's been a lot of conversation in question, live, and certainly on social media about the total cost of the project being, you know, upwards of 30 million, 50 million. We've had a fair amount of cost estimates along the way here, so. Yeah, that have been wrong, but again, I just want to feel, I guess all of us probably want to feel, and I'm sure the residents want to feel that there's, you know, a fair amount of confidence in the cost estimates that you're presenting today. No pressure, but pressure.
Yeah, no, and honestly, it's not pressure on me because this is something that was done by an entire project team that I wasn't even part of, right? So
You're just piecing the pieces
I'm
together.
trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together and saying, where can I help out, try to trim this down or move this thing forward, or just give some really, at this point, impartial advice that's born a little bit of ignorance, because I haven't been in the trenches with the project, which sometimes is a good thing
A fresh face,
when you're
yeah.
looking at a project. So, in terms of real cost, I mean, this is based on, or at least it's rooted in what were real bids. Now, there were spreads and issues and things like that with the bids, but I mean, you did go out to the market. So, I mean, that's about as good of numbers you could ever hope to get. Those numbers were significantly higher than the reconciled estimate that two different cost estimators looked at. So, yeah, it being even higher than that, that's, again, on the risk management scale, I'd say that's probably on the lower end. If to me, the greatest risk in this project isn't that, it's once you start digging into this old building, what are you gonna find? So the real cost of the project might be hidden behind something in there. But in terms of bidding the scope of work and pricing that scope of work, I mean, I think you now have validation from several sources, which is good.
And there is contingency that builds in.
Yeah.
So unless you get something totally, I'm not a construction person, but there could be something that's just like a bomb that you can't.
Yeah, so the most recent contingency that's built into the building committee's budget is 1.5 million, which is a pretty healthy
Yeah.
contingency. That's 80%, something like that. It's more than it would normally be in a project this size, so.
So I would like to be just a little mindful of Attorney Ritter's time. Is there any questions for him on the resolution?
Yeah.
Because I know this is a lot about the number.
No, I think it would be the unwinding part of it, getting us some bulleted outline of what that looks like, what the impact to the town is. I'm guessing that would fall to you to figure out.
So if it
Yeah,
fails.
I can definitely do that. First of all, anytime a bond lawyer is told that a resolution is well drafted, we're very appreciative of that. So I do appreciate that. We're often challenged for our language for being too technical. So thank you. If you decide to abandon the project, for lack of a better description, and just not move forward, as Peggy said, the IRS would want to make sure that we did one of two things, right? Because again, we're taking advantage. These are tax exempt bonds federally and state. So the federal government has some restrictions on us. They'd want you to pay off existing debt service, right? So you're not overburdening the tax exempt debt market. You're taking your bond proceeds and you're retiring current debt that you have, okay? So that would be something you could spread out over a couple of years to make it balanced, but that would be one option. The second option would be to transfer it to other capital projects. But that gets tricky about what approvals you'll need for that, right? So we'd have to really think long and hard about what your approval process would be under the town charter. I'd work with the town attorney on that. Or as Peggy said, you could change the scope of the project and maybe do demolition or something. But again, it goes back to what authorizations are needed. So yeah, we'd have to unpack that a little bit, but those are your basic options. You change the scope, you deal with what you can do on that site, you transfer the proceeds to other capital projects, or you retire existing debt service. That's where we'd probably be limited to. And it's not unusual to have unspent bond proceeds and transfer them, but normally not to the size that you have it, right? Normally it's maybe a couple $100,000, but you have cities that borrow $100 million a year. And it's not unusual for them to have a 5% surplus in something and just transfer it to something else. So it may be unusual for Madison, given how much you borrow on an annual basis, but it does happen, right? Projects come in way over or sometimes way under. I've seen both.
That would be it then.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Ben.
Okay, great.
For Attorney Ritter.
Should
So,
we vote? And then-
yeah, so,
Where do we want to talk about the rebidding and all that? Is that next?
yeah, we can talk about, I'm just thinking, so then in terms of the resolution, if everybody's comfortable with the way the resolution is, we're basically approving to recommend. We're not approving the resolution because that handles, the town does that, basically, the voters do that. Okay. I was all tripped up on this when I did the agenda, so I guess then, I could put the dollar amount in the motion or just leave the motion as is because it's in the resolution.
I think leave it as is.
Okay.
The resolution.
Okay, any other further comments then? So I guess with that, then, I guess, all in favor of approving the motion as, presented on the agenda, or that I made on the agenda, say aye. Aye. All right, motion passes unanimously, great. So we will schedule the Board of Finance meeting, and then we're just gonna talk more about some of the project things. So any other questions for Attorney Ritter? No?
Nope.
Thanks.
All right, well, thank you for your time.
Thanks, everybody. I'll see you in April for the town meeting. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Take care.
All right, great, so we can post this, the public can see it. So then I guess really the next steps discussion, and this kind of falls into also item number 3 about the bids. So the building committee was commenting about should they weigh in on that, and I think I'd like to open that up to the board about, the recommendation is that we don't proceed from our staff, is we don't proceed with the current bid packages and that we repackage the project. There's a number of reasons why it recommends that. I think that I was originally thinking like, well, we gotta hold on to these numbers, but then as I've gotten into this over the last month, I feel we're far better off just really starting from scratch in terms of that, not from scratch, that's not the right word. But just kind of cleaning everything up, packaging it. We have
Starting
a
at a
new
new
approved-
base.
Right, plus we'll have an approved project that we're going out to, or approved budget now, because before,
Right.
we weren't, it was, people knew there was a funding gap issue with this. So that was kind of my opinion,
And when would they go for new bids? Would it be post?
Post-referendum,
Referendum?
yeah.
Okay.
So probably a month after that, all right, Ben, you need a little bit of time to kind of pull together the new big package. And that's gonna take some time with the architect and the building.
Yeah, so we don't want to do that work now, because if it fails, we'd be wasting a lot. We're getting quotes to jump back into this, but we don't want to award that and do all that work, then the referendum fails, we just wasted another, whatever it is,
Right.
20 grand.
Right. Okay, yeah.
So if we do nothing, the bids expire. and-
March 20th, yeah.
and
Yeah.
Then they're just gone. And I think, I think, Ben, you made a strong case.
Yeah.
Or Peter, whoever wants to take credit for it. For,
He's here to stay.
for letting them go.
100% Ben.
Oh, did I just hear the bus beeping and backing up? I'm comfortable letting it expire.
I agree with that.
I do too.
So I think that,
Maybe just a question though, Ben, or Peter, from your experiences though, in the market, what's the likelihood, if we let them expire, will some of the same people that bid on the project
Absolutely.
come back in?
100%.
100%.
Always.
Probably with a sharper pencil.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so the last time this happened, which was this is, to me, on a large project, this $8 or $9 million project, was in 2021 to 2022, when things were like really, within months, just going to the moon. We had 2 bidders on a project. That's what we found out. We were way over like what everybody thought. We had a budget approved by the state, everything. We actually went back to the state, lobbied them. They actually increased, because it was happening across the board. They increased it was primarily state grant funded. They increased our construction grant. We went back out to the market a little under a year later, and we went from 2 bidders to 9.
Wow.
And the same 2 people that bid also bid the second round.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Awesome.
In these types of situations, yeah, definitely.
They're following this, I guess is the point.
Yeah.
and there was one additional bid that had to pull out because they admitted something, so that.
Yeah.
this would
This would actually help them,
allow-
right?
this
Yeah.
would allow them an opportunity to do that. So I know, Joe Ballantyne, the chair of the building committee, is here, but you're hearing kind of unanimity, it sounds like, unless, that, we would want to proceed, where we would do the bidding after the referendum, and repackage it. So, I know that the building committee obviously wants to understand what their role is right now. They've done all this hard work, they've gotten us to this point, and really, we're kind of going out with a budget that they're recommending, the design they're recommending. I'm just thinking, really, we don't want to be doing too much until we know if we have the budget, right? So, I would envision if this passes, then there'd be an opportunity to have that discussion about the next phase of the bidding. And then a lot of these concepts that Ben had gone through in terms of where we can find pockets of money if we need it, those can be discussed with the committee and everything later if we have to go there. But the intention is, let's get the budget set first, and then proceed. And I think, there might be some housekeeping items you guys have to kind of tackle. I think really the most important thing is for them to be involved as advocates for the project, obviously, because it's a beautiful design. I think people are really impressed. And one of the things I'm hoping to do is put together kind of a virtual walkthrough so people can really understand, how incredible the asset this could be for our community if we can move forward with it. So, and so involving them in that, education piece to the public would be important. And I think that's where, in that sense, it's really kind of waiting and see if we get the funding approved. And then there'll be a lot of work, hopefully, if it gets approved, right? So you guys will be very busy, doing kind of.
I think the building committee will have a lot more clarity on how the whole project is going to go forward after what the work we put in. We brought it to a certain point. We're sort of at a stop at the moment, and we'll get the next few weeks. We'll add a whole lot of clarity to the project, and then I think it's more appropriate to talk about the role of the building committee once we get that clarity.
Yeah, that's wise.
Yeah.
And please thank the building committee for everything that they've done so far, and yourself included. I mean, this has been, I know, not an easy process with all the ups and downs, so a ton of thanks.
We're looking forward to the ribbon cutting. That's what,
As are we.
that's what we've been waiting for almost from the beginning.
I bet.
Yeah, definitely. And I will say, we had the opportunity to tour the new Neck River Elementary School last week.
Yeah.
And you just realize what incredible assets we can have in this community, for people to really, it's gonna be a beautiful school. And I really think this is something that's gonna be, I've always said, transformative in our downtown. Not only just the beauty of the building and what we can build, but also the activity in it and the vitality that it can bring to downtown. So, so that's why I'm hoping the virtual thing will kind of give people a little flavor of that. So, so I don't know if there's any other items. Maybe I'll just go back. Jeannie, if you could put the timeline up real quick. And I'll send this around to the board members because I picked these dates based on availability, but you don't have to tell me now, but maybe email me and, if you like, I don't think we all, I'll have to go to all of them, I guess. But I mean, obviously it'd be great for the board to show up to all of these. And it'll pretty much be the same presentation, and it'll be a question and answer session like we did last time after the presentation. But just wanted to highlight, and if you have other ideas about how this could be handled or where we were kind of looking at space, or we could do hybrid. And I actually was talking to the superintendent, because Brown is a nice auditorium. He said they do have Promethean boards, and I just got to see if I can get Madison cable access, because the problem is that they don't have the camera stuff.
Oh.
So I'm gonna need them for the senior center. So this is tentative until I make sure everything lines up, but it shows you we're kind of, here we are, March 3rd. So, and we'll be working on the materials, and the board will get an opportunity to see the draft of all that, and the explanatory text and all that. And really a month from now, we'll be kind of finalizing this.
And as part of our public information sessions, are we going to be able to also present to the public what any potential operating costs are going to look like? I know that's been an important question as we've been doing other projects with the schools and everything else. So I think we probably have some better information with updated systems that we've put square footage wise.
Yeah, those,
Compare.
we provided that in the first one, and I know that, the facilities department's working on updating those numbers of
Okay.
what, and what's nice is we have a much better understanding of the systems now that we're beginning building, so we're updating that. The headcount recommendation that was a couple years ago has stayed the same. In terms of Austin, there was like 2 custodians and I think 1, I forgot the title of the position, but, so and that was all in the original, proposal as well. So we'll update all those, what those staffing costs would be. We're gonna try to address the revenue thing, which I think is still tricky because it's a chicken and egg thing, so we can talk about, we're working on putting to get a little bit more substance, but I do find the revenue will be there for sure. And I feel comfortable that we will be generating some revenue. But I think a lot of this is gonna be, there's gonna be a ramp up period. And then I think it's gonna kind of go in the, it's gonna kind of grow and live on its own, right? So that could change and navigate, but I think we'll try to put some more detail together on the revenue side as well. So we've been working on all that.
Yeah, I mean, I for one have always been uncomfortable with the revenue portion of it. We do things in Madison for the benefit and enjoyment of Madison taxpayers, not to
Charge them.
drive, well, and not to offset property tax bills. We're providing a service. Yes, we rent out the surf club, and yes, it generates some income, but it certainly doesn't pay its own way. In that, and even with all of the unnecessary parking passes that we sell to residents.
Knew that was coming.
And so I don't think that we can talk about it as a little bit of icing on the side of the cake, that there will be some, but that's not what you're buying. You're buying something that brings vitality to the town, hopefully. And if it generates a little income to help offset its costs, that's great. This is not a cash flow positive operation. And
It was never intended to be, yeah.
It was never intended to be, but I think sometimes we talked or it was discussed with a little bit too much emphasis. And so I would encourage that we acknowledge it, but downplay its role in the overall scope of things.
Well, I think I would agree. I think there was some ideas because when we first started about taking Academy, that we could actually generate some really good revenue for leasing space to different arts organizations or whatever. But then the reality is we're beyond that now. This is a community center. We're also issued taxes and bonds. So the financing alone precludes the type of revenue. We can obviously generate things to cover some certain costs, which we always do, for nominal fees. But I do feel confident this is going to be very and we're looking at our fees to make sure that we're also updating and looking at those things. I mean, some of our fees for room uses and things like that have not been updated in 10 years, maybe 15 years. So that's part of the exercise. He's trying to make sure like, okay, what is this? Because this is a good reset button for all our community spaces, to kind of standardize it and look at the rooms but I hear what you're saying. So I think but that will be addressed a little bit more in the presentation as well. And then, some of the updated drawings and all that other stuff. So I think it'll be, we'll just keep it moving forward. So with that, I guess, I don't know if there's any other questions or discussion about, can open it up for, take a few minutes for citizens' comments?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, so citizens' comments, please raise your hand in the room. Yes, state your name and address.
Peggy, Bill Stableford, 4 Hampshire Road. I think we've been looking at the revenue projections since 2019, one committee or another, and I think that the potential revenue will depend entirely on the degree to which this building can be built out to the original concept of all the rooms, from the gymnasium to the kitchen to the art room to the theater. So, and again, this is all hinged on the funding, which we've been discussing, the degree to which we can completely renovate the building with all of the hoped-for features will, to a large extent, determine the number of people we can get in there and the paying public. So it will all hinge on what the building ends up looking like.
We have a beautiful design in front of us, so.
Yes.
Thank you for your comment. Any other questions here in the room? Comments? No? Online, are there any hands raised online, Jeannie?
There currently are no hands raised.
Okay, there'll be lots of opportunities for questions as we go forward again. So I guess, hearing that, then, motion to adjourn.
So
All right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.